I want to thank you all. In regards to the state's comments regarding what we say, I agree. Okay, so if you heard things in opening that didn't come out during the trial, I agree. You cannot consider that. One thing you will learn is, or as Mr. Yalamachili said, the state has the burden. So typically we decide what we're going to present based on what we feel is the strength of the state's case. The case presented to you these last 3 weeks, including jury selection, is what can only be described as a story of negligence, a carelessness for the life and the death of Ms. Baker that extends far past indifference. As you've heard through this trial, we have brought you more facts about Ms. Baker than the state. We've brought you information regarding how Ms. Baker was, that she believed in justice, that she believed in fairness, and that she believed in listening to everything before making a decision. She's similar to a jury. The state is bringing Mr. Faust before you today to accuse him of crimes that he did not commit. And of course, you don't just take my words for it, you look at the evidence. The state presented no evidence that Mr. Faust, if it's his DNA, you have to decide if it's his DNA, and we'll get into that. But the state presented no evidence that Mr. Faust's DNA means murder. The state presented no evidence that Mr. Faust's DNA means rape. The state presented no evidence that Mr. Faust's DNA means burglary. The state presented no evidence that Mr. Faust's DNA means arson or any of the other charges that they charged him with in this indictment. Mr. Faust and everyone involved in this case would like to thank you for your time, your dedication, and your willingness to put 100% of your attention into this case. And put aside your very, we understand how important it is, but your very important personal and business matters. But most of all, I want to thank you all for your courage. Because courage is what this moment demands. Not just to listen, but to stare directly at injustice and say, not here, not now, not on our watch. And that's what you're being asked to do. Stare down injustice. I want to start with a simple truth. You folks, not us, not anybody in this courtroom, you folks are the last line of defense between an innocent man and a system that has tried to break him. They falsely accused him, and that tried mightily to bury the truth. This case was corrupted from the start. It was corrupted by biases. It was corrupted by political pressure and a need to avoid admitting a mistake was made or mistakes were made in the initial investigation that you all heard about. And most fatally, it was corrupted by a lead investigator whose misconduct infected every single part of this case from the top to bottom. In our opening statement last week, we told you what questions to ask. We gave you a list of questions in our opening statement that the state would need to answer. And we warned you about the questions. We told you that the state will not be able to answer these questions with the evidence that they presented. And we begged you to try to answer those questions with the evidence that the state had presented. Those questions were, how does Mr. Faust's DNA simply being present in Ms. Baker's body, and again, you have to determine what the facts are. You may say it's not his DNA, but we're going to say worst case scenario if you say it is. How does Mr. Faust's DNA simply being present in Ms. Baker's body, along with 2 other DNA profiles, establish that he is the person that killed Ms. Baker? The next question, when did Mr. Faust's DNA get in Ms. Baker's body? Where's that evidence? If Mr. Faust killed Ms. Baker, how did Mr. Faust get into Ms. Baker's home? How did Mr. Faust get away from Ms. Baker's home unseen? If he committed the crime in the morning hours, I believe they said between 8 and 8:30 from the testimony in the stand when the individuals were seen walking in the neighborhood. If Mr. Faust killed Ms. Baker, why was the hair that was found in her hand, around her body, and on her body that did not belong to her, why was it of Caucasian origin? What evidence does the state have placing Mr. Faust in Ms. Baker's home? How does the evidence that the state has presented to you support that Mr. Faust broke into Ms. Baker's home, sodomized Ms. Baker, viciously beat Ms. Baker, raped Ms. Baker, strangled Ms. Baker, stabbed Ms. Baker in the neck, and set her apartment on fire while Ms. Baker lay dying? If Tara Baker was Chris Melton's future fiancée, why would he forget whether she told him she would be alone the night before her death? You have to decide if that's something an individual that's been with somebody for 2 years would forget. Is that something a boyfriend or a husband or a fiancé would forget if their loved one was killed due to being home alone? You have to ask yourself, how did Mr. Melton respond to Ms. Baker's death? And you heard the testimony on that, and we'll talk about that. But what I ask you to do is pay attention to the physical evidence. We're going to talk about the physical evidence. Pay attention to the science. The science is the most important thing in this case. The state wants you to believe that the DNA is everything. The science is going to be the most important thing in this case, and we're going to talk to you about the science. Pay attention to the medical facts that were given to you. But also pay attention to the integrity, which is the very essence, the integrity of this investigation. But you also saw something during the course of the trial that none of us might have expected. Something that should sadden us all. Something that maybe would anger us. On full display, you saw the lengths to which some, and only some, police officers will go to avoid admitting there were mistakes made in the investigation of Ms. Baker's case, to protect their own at the expense of the rest of us, at the expense of Mr. Faust, who is an innocent man. Before we examine the evidence in this case, which we absolutely will do, we need to understand the very foundation of the entire system of justice in which we operate. It is the bedrock on which this entire system is built. Reasonable doubt. And that term, you all have heard it before, but this term isn't just legal jargon. It isn't just a technicality, and it's not a slogan. It is a constitutional shield that protects the innocent and prevents the government from punishing without proof. The state has the high burden to prove every single element of every single offense that they've charged Mr. Faust with. And they have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, which simply means a doubt for which a reason can be given. Not a vague or arbitrary doubt, but a doubt based upon common sense and reasoning, as the state advised you. But I want to emphasize this because it sounds complicated, but it's very simple. It's a doubt for which a reason can be given. This doubt can be, and the judge will tell you this. What I'm about to tell you, you're going to hear the judge say the exact same thing. This doubt can be based upon a consideration of the state's evidence as a whole, a lack of evidence, or a conflict in the evidence. And those powerful words are not just some legal jargon. They're a mandate. They're your obligation. They're your community's protection against injustice. In our system of justice, Edrick Faust sits here today, presumed innocent. He's cloaked in the presumption of innocence, and it protects him like a suit of armor from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And that presumption is not fragile. It doesn't just disappear because there's a charge that comes about, or because somebody has a badge, or because the state has a theory. That presumption stands firm unless and until the state clears that high burden. The highest bar the law provides, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That means at the end of this case, at the end of this trial, you think about one or more of the charges. You think, you know what? Maybe that's true. It might be true what the state is saying. Then, if that's your feeling, you vote not guilty. If you think it's possibly true or probably true, your vote must be not guilty. If someone among you think it's likely true or even very likely to be true, your vote is not guilty. Because none of those standards, maybe, might be, possibly, probably, likely, very likely, none of those meet the extraordinary burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, guilt beyond a reasonable doubt has best been explained two ways, in two different ways. One is pretty simple. We've already discussed the first way. It's a doubt for which you can state a reason. That's the simple. If you can state a reason for your doubt, that is the first definition of reasonable doubt. But that reason has to be based upon common sense and reason, right? We can't say an alien came down, committed this crime, and left evidence of Mr. Faust being there. That's fanciful. That isn't a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt is based upon common sense and reason. So don't violate your oath and say, well, hey, I think it's a conspiracy theory. Some other people did it, and they're just snatching up Mr. Faust. Let me make that clear. Some other people that have not been mentioned in this case, some other people in another country, aliens, animals, whatever. That is not a reasonable doubt, because that wouldn't be based upon common sense and reason. But if you could state one reason, a reason to doubt the state's case, your verdict must be not guilty. Now, as a jury, you have rules and principles just like we have them in our homes and in our businesses. We also have them in court. So you find a truthful verdict within the confines of the law that is given to you by the honorable court. So if you want to say the state never presented evidence showing how Mr. Faust's DNA means rape, there is no physical evidence or witnesses connecting Mr. Faust to Ms. Baker's home. And also add the fact that Dr. Falzone, who testified here, told us based on the injuries to Ms. Baker's anus, she was sexually assaulted anally. Dr. Faust told us that. And before I follow up with the evidence, I want to mention one thing that is very important. The judge will tell you that you cannot presume that Mr. Faust in any manner acted with criminal intent. The state has to present evidence of that. You can't just say, well, his DNA is present, that's enough for me. It's his DNA. Well, he didn't explain the DNA, so he's guilty. The state has to explain Mr. Faust's DNA. The state charged Mr. Faust with rape. So the state has to show you, how does his DNA mean rape? Otherwise, that presumes criminal intent, and it violates the oath you've taken to follow the law given by the honorable court. The judge will also tell you, to convict Mr. Faust, not only must the facts be consistent with Mr. Faust committing all of the acts in the indictment, but they also must exclude every other reasonable theory other than Mr. Faust's guilt. Chris Melton killing Ms. Baker is not only a reasonable theory, it is supported by the evidence. And I'll start with Ms. Ashley Hinkle. She was the last witness you heard from. You'll go to the last page on that. And again, no evidence came in about anybody running off, so I don't want you to consider that. You can't consider that. But this is what led us to say our case is where it needs to be. Ms. Hinkle, the states, this wasn't our DNA expert. This isn't somebody we hired. This isn't somebody we paid. This is somebody they brought in to support their case. Ms. Hinkle testified that DNA doesn't last in the anus for 5 days. And you may remember me asking her about the test where they had 5 swabs, and they tested the 5 swabs, and all 5 anal swabs came back negative. But at most, as we have, 3 days. And that's best case scenario. One of the generals said 2 days, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We'll say 3 days. And the state came before you and said, well, it's a drainage theory. It's a drainage theory. You even had Chris Melton, and you have to decide how he knows this. I don't know where he got it from, but well, I think I know where he got it from, but you have to decide where he got it from. He took the stand under oath and said, well, my DNA was there probably because of drainage. But this is the issue with the state's drainage theory. If we concede, I don't agree with it, but you have to decide what's truthful and what's not truthful. But if we concede that Mr. Melton was with Ms. Baker on Sunday and DNA only lasts 3 days, his DNA would have been gone by Wednesday. So for Ms. Baker to be killed on Friday and Mr. Melton's DNA to show up, it doesn't fit the physical evidence. It doesn't fit the science. And you may have heard the state ask a question, well, does the clock reset? And you heard Ms. Hinkle say, yeah, but it will require penetration. So if it number one, it wouldn't be there, but let's say hypothetically, it requires penetration. Whose DNA profile was the only identifiable DNA profile in Ms. Baker's anus? It was Chris Melton's. So even if you take Mr. Melton's theory, even if you try to give him the benefit of the doubt, it doesn't match the science. And you actually heard Elizabeth Bigham say that. We have to explain your DNA. It doesn't make sense. The issue is Ms. Bigham went to a lab way out in California. You heard the young lady come in, Ms. Lacone. She was very honest. She said, well, I've never been asked to testify about this. This is a presumptive test. Both of these tests are presumptive tests. This is her first time coming into court. Based on what she said, she has not been called in court to testify about this science at no other time. But what Ms. Bigham does, when Mr. Melton wouldn't change his timeline, she changed the form. And this is the significance of the DNA in the mouth. If you'll go to the paper before. I don't know if I wrote this down, but let's see. This is the significance of the DNA in the mouth. So what Ms. Hinkle told us is that DNA in the mouth at longest lasts 24 hours. At longest. So when Ms. Bigham was meeting with Chris Melton saying, hey, we need to explain this because we need to put it on bad guy, we need to explain it because we need to go after the one we want, she knew when Chris Melton was saying, hey, I didn't see her the day before, hey, I didn't see her 2 days prior, hey, I didn't see her that week, that was a problem for their theory. It was a big problem. Because she wants Mr. Faust, whose DNA was at one time was only in the mouth. But she has a problem because Mr. Melton's DNA is in the mouth at that time and the anus. So she doesn't go to a lab in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina. We're on the East Coast. And we don't know how many labs she went to. We don't know how many times she tried to get this stuff tested and tried to get the opinion she wanted. Maybe she was expert shopping. That evidence didn't come in. We don't know. But we do know they flew someone all the way from California on taxpayer dollars to testify about these tests where this young lady says it's presumptive. This is a presumptive test. This is the evidence they brought you. And the reason they brought you that evidence is because they had to take Chris Melton out of the mouth. But they forgot about the anus. They forgot about the anus. In fact, the state didn't even ask about the anus. If you notice, when they presented their case, they just said mouth and vagina. Is that searching for the truth? The elected district attorney came up here and said, our job is to find the truth. I've given you good and bad facts on our side. Is that searching for the truth? Where you only ask questions in the same manner that Elizabeth Bigham asked questions, whereas to put everything on Mr. Faust. The science does not support that Mr. Faust killed Ms. Baker. The science, the timeline supports Chris Melton. He's continuously lied. Even Elizabeth Bigham had to admit, yeah, I told him it wasn't consistent with what he said 23 years ago, or for the last 23 years. When have you ever in your life, whether it's on television or any experience you've ever had, known law enforcement to tell someone, look, it's not consistent with what you've been telling us, but let me offer a suggestion of what you should say. You've never heard of that. You've never heard of that. If you weren't in this courtroom, you wouldn't believe it. If somebody told you outside that, hey, I heard about this case, you know, the lead detective is telling the individual to lie so they could put it on somebody else, you'll say, no way. This guy's nuts. He doesn't know what he's talking about because it sounds so unbelievable. But what doesn't lie is the science and the physical evidence. You heard their expert, not my expert, their expert talk to you about the timelines. I also want to talk about the anus as well. How is it possible that Mr. Faust is charged with aggravated sodomy? He doesn't leave his DNA, but he leaves Chris Melton's DNA. How does that make sense? Mr. Faust is charged with aggravated sodomy for anally sexually assaulting Miss Baker, but somehow, some way, he doesn't leave his DNA. He leaves Chris Melton's DNA. That was supposed to be gone because according to Chris Melton, he hadn't seen her since Sunday. That's the question that you all, as jurors, have to answer. Let's talk about Mr. Melton's actions, okay? Mr. Melton came in here, he testified, you know, we had this relationship, we were close, I loved her, and he even came to you all and started trying to cry. He couldn't get the tears out, but he wanted to get you all emotionally riled up. And I told you all, be careful about the emotions in this case because they do want you to get emotionally riled up. However, when I started questioning him, what did he tell us? Yeah, we already went over these questions. Mr. Melton got on this stand, took an oath, gave you a performance, something that he had already started doing with the state before he came in this courtroom.
Hang on a second, Mr. Cruz. Let's wait. Whoever phone that is, that person is going to need to leave the courtroom. Ms. Cruz, just hang on a second, sir, if you would, please.
Does it pause my time running?
Your time has stopped. Don't worry. Don't worry. I got you. All right. You may continue.
But he gave you a performance. And I'm sure before cross-examination started, you probably said, oh, my God, this terrible guy, this poor guy. He's so hurt by this. He's finally had opportunity to tell his story until I had opportunity to start asking him questions. And I appreciate him admitting that he met with the state. I appreciate him admitting that he went through these questions with the state. But you have to judge his credibility on the witness stand. Now, let's talk about his actions. We don't even have to talk about his actions in court, because this is 25 years later. Let's talk about his actions the weekend of Ms. Baker's death. So Friday, he goes to the police department. They didn't tell him to come. He voluntarily goes. The state wants to paint that as, oh, he's such a good guy. We didn't have to call him. He just came up here because he just wanted to be a good person. You lose the love of your life. Whose first thought is to run to the police department in a whole nother city? Not to comfort the family, not to call Mrs. Virginia Baker and say, oh, my God, what's going on? His job or his decision is, let me go to the police department. And then Saturday, what did Mr. Bill Teeter tell us? And again, this is evidence. Bill Teeter says he comes to pick up his truck. If I lost somebody when I was dating my wife 2-3 years and something like this happened, this tragic, I'm not thinking about a truck. I'm not going to pick up a car. I could care less about a car. The family wasn't picking up cars, I'm sure. They were trying to put their life back together and figure out what was going on with this shop. But Chris Melton, he's picking up cars. Sunday, well, we don't even have to go to Sunday. Let's go to Monday. Because police tried to emphasize over and over and over and over and over again. He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have a lawyer. What did, I believe her name was Miss Christie. Her old name was Christie Search. I cannot remember her new name. She has a new last name, though. But she worked at the bank. Monday, he's at the bank requesting a loan. That's evidence in this case. Monday, she dies Friday. Monday, he's at the bank requesting a loan. What would you need a loan for on a Monday? Probably legal fees, right? You call a lawyer, hey, police are questioning me about this death of my girlfriend. What's your fee going to be? I don't know. We don't know what he went to the bank for, but that's something you need to consider. Chris Melton went to the bank on a Monday to get a loan. What does he do within a week of Ms. Baker's death? On Thursday, he's at Mrs. Ashley P.V. Hall's house. She testifies to that. On Friday, he goes on 2 dates. Miss Ashley P.V. Hall told us on one of the dates, and she tried to explain it away, well, he's just a flirty guy. He just has a flirty personality. But he's flirting with the girl, and he's rubbing her back. Your girlfriend just brutally died a week earlier. Chris, and I mistake things. I'm human. I am not perfect. I believe your notes, trust your notes. You're the jury. You decide the facts. I believe Chris even admitted to calling Ms. Hufford past 10 p.m. And I believe he said that everybody was hurting, if I remember correctly. And that was the reason he was reaching out to her. But actually, if your girlfriend dies a week prior, why are you calling other women at 10 o'clock at night within a week of her death saying, well, if you're out in the town, give me a call? Chris's actions support that he was angry with Ms. Baker after her death. Her death supports Chris Melton was angry with Ms. Baker. He told us she didn't engage in anal sex. What other way could you humiliate a person? If that's something she doesn't do, you do it anyway. He's living his life. He's not hurt. He's going on dates. She has a candlelight visual. He skips it. He didn't love Ms. Baker. He hated Ms. Baker. We don't know why. The evidence didn't come in. But he knows Ms. Baker has a candlelight visual. He's this great, dedicated boyfriend. He's just the perfect guy, just the nice guy. But she has this candlelight visual, and what Mr. Melton decides to do is, you know what, it's a country concert in Atlanta. Let me go see, give me a country guy. Who? Let's go see Garth Brooks. My girlfriend just died. Let's do a triple date to see Garth Brooks And, I'm going to blame it on her pretty much saying, Chris, you don't need to be there. And I think somebody even came in here and tried to explain, well, it was people they worked with. Chris had no need to be there. It is your significant other. Pay your respects if you care. He didn't care. He hated Miss Baker. And the manner of her death supports the exact same thing. You don't have a stranger breaking your house. A stranger, never been there before, just picked your house out of any house in the neighborhood, breaking your house, and kill in this type of manner. This is a overkill. This is a overkill. This isn't a random stranger killing. Somebody wants to steal your car, they shoot you in the head, they take the car. They don't shoot you and keep shooting you and keep shooting you and keep shooting you and keep shooting you. Nothing was stolen out of the house but a laptop. What does a laptop signify? It's personal. It's information on the laptop. This isn't she had diamond earrings in her ear. She had jury in her room. Roommates, jury in their room, money in the room. Nothing's taken. The person that went into Miss Baker's house was either led into Miss Baker's house or they had a key. Now, I asked Elizabeth Bigham about the keys. I said, hey, do you have Miss Baker's keys? What did she say? Yeah, I think so, but I don't know where they are. Or we may have them or they may be downstairs. I asked about the lock. Exact same answer. Now, the significance of those keys is twofold. One was Miss Baker's house key on the key. And I asked Mr. Melton, did you see Miss Baker enter her house? Because Mr. Melton would know what her house key looks like. A stranger wouldn't. A stranger wouldn't break into a house. Court's indulgence. A stranger wouldn't break into a house, take the keys, and say, let me see if this one fits. Nope. Let me try this one. Nope. Oh, this one works. And then run off. That's not something a stranger does. But a person that knows what your keys look like, or who has a key, they know, okay, I can get in and out quick. A stranger doesn't. Stay around and clean up your house. And Dr. Valerie Lowe said it best. She said, it's like somebody knew we weren't going to be at home. How would a stranger just, out of 6 people possibly being in the home, how would a stranger just pick the right time and then have the nerve to stay there and clean the place up? That's not a stranger. That's somebody that knew Miss Baker. That's somebody that was angry with Miss Baker. Miss Baker didn't have a towel near her. She didn't have clothes near her. This was somebody she was comfortable with. And again, whose DNA was present? According to the state, Mr. Melton's DNA is in her vagina and her anus. But for the last 23 years, before Elizabeth Bigham got involved, his DNA was in her mouth and her anus. Whatever you think right, or whatever you think is right, you have to decide. You're the judges of the facts in this case. Now, you know that Chris Melton is a liar. It's been, Ms. Bigham said it. You heard the recording. You heard me ask her questions about the statement she made to him. This is inconsistent with what you said over the past 23 years, and that interview was in 2024. Mr. Faust is a truthful person. During his interview, he was asked about white women that he dated. He named the white woman that he dated, but he also said that he's had plenty of women in his day. And he told the investigators, I don't discriminate. I'm not a discriminatory person. Color doesn't matter to me. Dating, and you got to listen to the questions they ask because they want you to make assumptions. They want you to hear things one time and then start making assumptions. Dating signifies a commitment. They asked him about dating. Chris Melton claimed to date Ms. Baker. Mr. Faust didn't. They asked Mr. Faust, why was his DNA found in the house? Now, at this point, you know Mr. Faust's DNA was not found in Ms. Baker's house outside of it being in her body. They were asking him trick questions to see what he would say. And what did he say? What? My DNA? My DNA? I've never been in a house in Deer Park. I've never been over there. And again, the physical evidence does not lie. The science does not lie. The physical evidence tells you that Mr. Faust is telling the truth. Every single witness in this case that we talked about, what was found in the house, including the microscope, I think he was, I can't think of his name, but the expert who did the microscope with the hairs, he admitted, and I think it's bad science, but you have to decide, he admitted that there were no African American hairs found on, around, or anywhere near Ms. Baker's body. The physical evidence supports that Mr. Faust was telling the truth. The physical evidence supports that Chris Melton is a liar. After telling Mr. Faust that they had warrants for his arrest, they told him it was for murder. And mind you, let me not skip this point. They had already told him twice. So when you see him talking, he's already been told they have warrants for his arrest. He just isn't to the point where the warrants are for. But after telling him that they had warrants for his arrest for murder and aggravated sodomy, something significant happened, and the state doesn't want you to think about this. Just imagine you're at Walmart, or you're just out and about living your lives. Police come and pick you up. They're talking to you, and they say, you know what? We have warrants for your arrest. We already have the warrants. There's no getting out of it. For murder and aggravated sodomy. Something significant happens, and police are aware of this. You panic because you're scrambling, trying to figure out, oh my goodness, what the heck is going on? But they tell him this, and then they ask him, and it's very important that you listen to what they say, because you have to remember, Elizabeth Bigham is biased. She's already told Chris Melton, before she's met with Mr. Faust, we have to put it on this guy. You have to keep all this stuff into context. The interview with Chris Melton happened, I believe, on May 5th. I believe May 5th or 6th came in on the testimony. May 9th was Mr. Faust's interview. So she's already told Chris Melton, we're trying to get this guy. We have to go after this guy. So it's very important that you listen to the language of the questions that are asked. She asked Mr. Faust if he knew a girl, and this is a paraphrase, from a cold case from 2001. They didn't show Mr. Faust a photo. They have him freaking out. It's a murder warrant, the most serious charge in the state of Georgia. They don't show him a photo. They don't even give him the decency of telling Mr. Faust the young lady's name. So when he says, they say, do you remember him? He says, I seen a paper. I believe he says, I seen a paper when it first happened. And we have a photo we admitted into evidence. But I'll show you the media shot of Ms. Baker. Now, mind you, this is 24, 23 years before his interview, so it's been a while since he's seen this, as he said in an interview, but this is the media shot of Ms. Baker. We introduced a photograph, and Mr. Melton testified to it. Yeah, this is how Ms. Baker looked on a day-to-day. But they don't give Mr. Faust the decency because they don't care. They want him to say something so bad that's inconsistent so they could come before you and say, look what he said, look what he said, look what he said. But no, you need to look at what they did. Because it could happen to anybody in this courtroom. Look at what they did. And as soon as he said, man, I don't know that girl, all right, we got him. And now, let me make this clear. They already had the warrants. So I don't want you to think for a minute that they were giving him a chance to explain anything. The warrants were secured before they arrested Mr. Faust. But they could have just showed him this photo. Mr. Faust, do you know this young lady? Have you ever seen this young lady in your life? They didn't even do that. They didn't give him the decency, but they didn't want him to say he knew her. And Mr. Faust could have lied. He could have said, oh, yeah, the girl you're talking about from Deer Park, yeah, we talked, we dated. He didn't do any of that. He didn't do any of that. They never gave him an opportunity to understand who they were referring to, but now they want to use the evidence against him. You want to perform a shock and awe type of presentation on somebody, arrest them, tell them they're charged with murder and aggravated sodomy, and then have a gotcha moment. They didn't give Mr. Faust the chances or the grace that they gave Chris Melton. Elizabeth Bigham testified that Chris Melton said 7 times that he last saw Ms. Baker 10 days prior to her death. We went through it together. 1, 2, this is the 3rd time, this is the 4th time, this is the 5th time. 7 times Chris Melton said 10 days. But she comes in here to defend the 5 days because it fits the narrative. What you witness in this courtroom is a tragedy. It's heartbreaking. It's terrifying because this could happen to anybody. I have one. So in this little discussion that we just had, I've given you many reasons to doubt. We probably just discussed about 15 to 20 reasons to doubt the state case. You agree with one, you're done. If you agree with one reason to doubt, you're done. That is a truthful verdict. You must follow the law because that's what you took an oath to do. The second best way to explain guilt beyond a reasonable doubt is you compare it to making the most important decision of your life. And I hope that no one ever has this situation, but I'm sure you're all aware, or you may not be aware, so I won't mention it, but just imagine you have somebody in the hospital, somebody you love, somebody you care about, and they're on life support. And you're the person in the hospital waiting room, and the doctor comes to you, and the doctor says, pull the plug. If you could look at that doctor and say, doctor, go ahead and pull the plug. You've answered all of my questions. I believe, or I know Chris Melton's alibi was confirmed. I know that because I trust Chris Melton, just like law enforcement trusted Mr. Melton, or Chris Melton, excuse me. They said it did not have to be confirmed, so doctor, I believe the exact same thing. I'm going to ignore that the FBI told ACCPD, and that was from that testimony came in through Mr. What was the gentleman's name? With the report. I cannot think of the gentleman's name. That testimony came in through Griffith. I asked Griffith about the FBI asking him to search Mr. Melton's hard drive. And what did Mr. Griffith tell us? Despite FBI saying, hey, this guy hasn't been ruled out, he's saying, well, you know what, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I know best. His alibi is confirmed. Don't worry about it. The FBI didn't clear him. But you may say, doctor, I trust Mr. Griffith. I trust what he said. Although scientifically his DNA says that, although science says that his DNA should not be present 5 days in Miss Baker's anus, I'm going to ignore that. I believe the state's drainage theory, doctor. I believe what they said. I don't know how, but somehow it drained from Sunday to Friday, and it stayed there, doctor. And I also believe that Miss Baker and Chris Melton were in a loving, caring relationship, and he was destroyed by the fact that she passed away. I believe that, doctor, so pull that plug. I'm satisfied. My mind is set. And when your mind is satisfied, and you hear the judge talk about reasonable doubt and the mind being satisfied, if your mind is satisfied, you have enough information. And what that means is your mind is not wavering. Well, maybe it did happen this way, maybe it didn't happen this way. When your mind is satisfied, it said you have all the information that you need to make a decision. It is not unsettled. And at that point, you know what to do. We've all had those type of decisions. Do I want a McMuffin in the morning? Do I want hash browns? You know what? I'm going to go with the McMuffin. My mind is not wavering. It is settled. When your mind is satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt, you don't have any reason to doubt it. Remember what we talked about. It's one reason. When your mind is satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt, you have no reason to doubt. You have to ignore Ms. Baker's roommates. And although on the state's examination, and I don't know the relationship they have with Mr. Melton now. I know it's a tough situation to come in this courtroom and talk about it. But they said, hey, they admitted when they were talking to police outside of this courtroom that Tara's relationship with, Ms. Baker's relationship with Chris, and I believe it was and I'll start with Ms. Valerie Lowe. Ms. Valerie Lowe told us that Tara herself said that her relationship with Chris was a distraction. And the day Ms. Baker was killed, like I stated, Ms. Lowe said it was almost like someone knew we weren't going to be home. Ms. Ashley P.V. Hall told us something inconsistent with what Chris Melton said. She had to admit when we were asking her questions that before Ms. Baker died, watching Ms. Baker's relationship with Chris Melton was just like watching the normal ending of a relationship. But you heard every law enforcement witness 24 years later, oh, it was a great relationship, it was a great relationship, it was a great relationship. But when we asked, who did you confirm that with? Oh, Chris. Mr. Faust didn't get that benefit. You'd also have to ignore that Chris failed to tell the police that him and Tara had a fight the week before her death. Right? And he came in here and he said, oh, well, yeah, it was a fight about a porno I had. It was an orange tape. He gave you this elaborate story about this porn to say we had a fight about a porn. Right? But I want you to consider that. I think that's a significant fact considering what occurred to Ms. Baker when she passed away. Now, I don't trust Chris Melton. I think everything he says is not to be trusted. But you may. Ms. Baker was sexually assaulted in multiple ways. If Chris Melton is telling the truth, the last fight they had was over pornography. And it was serious enough to cause a rift in the relationship. Now, with the laptop piece, we don't know if Ms. Baker wrote Mr. Melton a letter, typed it up, so he needed to take the laptop. We don't know. That didn't come in. But that is something for you to consider. Their last fight, according to Chris, was over porn. Her death was sexual in nature. You would also have to ignore Chris's statement about punching this wall 30 times, I believe was his testimony. So Chris Melton's testimony was that he punched the wall 30 times, and that's what caused the injuries to his hands. But this is a question I have for you. When you look at Mr. Melton's hands, because he said it was concrete that he punched, where were the bruises on his hands outside of the scratches? Mr. Melton said it was concrete that was punched, but at what point did he seek medical attention? He didn't. Mr. Melton came in here and said, well, this is my story. I punched the concrete wall 30 times because I was so distraught. And law enforcement even came in to back up that story. But the question I have for you, if his hands weren't a big deal and you knew on Friday that he didn't have these injuries, why take the pictures? Why go to the house and check if you say Chris Melton didn't have these injuries? Their actions are inconsistent with their statements. But I'm going to tell you why. And you have to judge witness credibility. Law enforcement has allowed this community to live in fear for the last 25 years, maybe 23. They've allowed it. When people heard about this case or thought about this case, it was because of law enforcement failures. The questions that the family had, they ignored for 23 years. And I tell you, my position, you have to decide, you're the jury. They weren't here defending Chris Melton. They were here defending themselves. They were here to say, hey, all this stuff we missed, forget about it. Don't worry about that. Because we didn't actually miss anything. There were, Detective Ricketts, there were law enforcement officers coming in here. And I admire law enforcement. I think they are heroes. When I'm running out of a building, they are running in. They are heroes. But you also have to understand, we have Detective Ricketts coming in saying, Chris Melton's alibi is confirmed. And if you could show the alibi chart that we did with Detective Ricketts. Chris Melton's alibi is confirmed. But when I started going through, well, Detective, did you confirm this? Were you able to speak to Nash Plumbing? No. Testimony even came in that they couldn't find Nash Plumbing in information. Chris Melton couldn't provide them an address to Nash Plumbing. They couldn't find Nash Plumbing. He couldn't even give them a phone number to Nash Plumbing. That is evidence in this case. But instead of admitting for the sake of justice, for the sake of Miss Baker and her memory that, hey, we may have made some mistakes, and if these mistakes get us closer to getting the right person in that chair, as opposed to the wrong person, we'll admit it. Because that's the right thing to do. Instead, they come in here and they double down on inconsistencies that don't make sense. Ricketts tells us Nash Plumbing for Chris, unconfirmed. Nash Plumbing for Josh, unconfirmed. Chris says he goes to the bank. Josh says he went to Chick-fil-A, unconfirmed. As you know, the bank is at 9:08 a.m. And I told you all, the most important time is before 9 a.m. for Chris Melton. The most important time is before 9 a.m. because at this point, Ms. Baker is gone. Truck Customs, he says 9:30 or earlier, and we know from Bill Teeter, it was after 9:30, it was 10. I believe Mr. Teeter said around 10. Grayson, Georgia, unconfirmed. But look at Josh. And this is from Ricketts. The same person who sat in here and said, it's nothing. These inconsistencies are nothing. Josh says they're in Grayson at 8 a.m. Chris would have to be in Grayson after 9:30 a.m. Chris says they've known each other for 1 month. Josh says they've known each other for a year. And when I asked him about it, he said, well, and this is Detective Ricketts, well, the way I just took it that he meant a year. Even on small mistakes, we all have children, grandchildren, siblings, parents. We're human. Nobody's perfect. But when you have a person or organization or entity trying to get you to believe that they made no mistakes when the mistakes are apparent, you have to judge their credibility. You have to take that into account when you're determining what your verdict is going to be, if you could trust this person or not trust this person. Now, I don't know if you caught this, but it blew my mind when I heard it. And I didn't ask him about it again because I didn't want him to try to change his answer. Chris Melton, on this stand during direct examination, they asked him, why didn't you want to go into the house when they asked you to identify the body? And we all, the entire team, we jotted this down in court. Chris Melton stated he didn't want to go into Miss Baker's apartment because he did not want to see the devastation he had caused. I don't know if you all caught that, but I absolutely caught it. Chris Melton came in here and pretty much confessed to what he did. But you're the jurors, you heard the testimony, you have to decide. You would also, to pull that plug, you would also have to ignore what Karen Williams told us. Now, Karen Williams did a sketch. This is a sketch. And I tell you, based on this trial, I don't trust anything in this case, but this is a sketch. And the questions I went over with Ms. Williams, formerly Carol Bryant, how much did the person weigh? We got her to admit that he had a full face. She said that he was not thin, he had a full face, probably around 220. We got her to admit, I asked her, he had a heavy-looking face. We got her to admit, yeah, he had a heavy-looking face. We asked her about the weight, again, 220, and she stated that he was big bone, kind of husky. But this is the person they give you. Now, I don't know, and I think we went over the mustache with it. They didn't even have the right type of facial hair on the person. But to me, what I believe, and you're the jury, you have to decide, they have made so many mistakes in this case, I wouldn't be shocked if they started changing evidence, just to be completely honest with you. And I hate to even say that. But when you introduce hair evidence in this case, you deceive the jury and say, hey, in these bags, and I said, can we open these? No, we're not going to open them. I asked, can we open this to make sure the evidence is what the evidence is? They brought you empty bags of evidence to get you to believe something that was not true. And then when we got the bags open, all of a sudden they found all the hairs and say, oh, this is with the GBI. And with these broken, I don't even know what to call them, but these broken slides or screens or whatever they may be. But also, and I'm going to go back to this, I'm going to go to this a lot. Not only do they present you empty evidence, they present junk science. Science that has never been presented in a court before to protect either themselves, which I think is more so protecting themselves, and to protect Chris Melton. Now, when we talk about the sketches, remember what everybody said, and this was consistent, because I asked the same question for every sketch witness. The person is walking. The person isn't trying to hide themselves. The person's just minding their business. And I also asked, is there Walmart? Some people said, I don't know. But we did have Ms. Riker say, yeah, I assumed the person was going to Walmart. And if you think about the direction everybody was walking, if this is the every single person that saw somebody said they were walking down this way. Nobody ever said, oh, well, I saw a person walking up towards Ms. Baker's house. They were all walking this way. And during the evidence, what is this way? The Walmart. You'll have that photo with you in evidence. On the other side, down here, past this subdivision, it's the Walmart. But what they did was, okay, let's get all these sketches of these people. They're walking. They aren't doing anything suspicious. Something that's important, they mentioned a laptop being stolen. That came in during the case. Not one of these sketch individuals said, oh, they were carrying a laptop. They were carrying anything. They were acting suspicious. It was just, they were walking. And the state is going to come to you and say, hey, we can't prove that Mr. Faust broke into her house, but we want you to pick one of the people that we have these sketches of and just say it was Mr. Faust. And we want you to assume, we want you to speculate. We want you to say that Mr. Faust is the person in the house. And I'll tell you this, if there's no evidence in the house of Mr. Faust's presence, this is something simple you can remember. No house, no Faust. If there's no evidence of Mr. Faust in the house, no house, no Faust. Tell them to present the evidence. If you can't present the evidence that Mr. Faust was in the house, we have to vote not guilty. We have to. We have to. You're saying this crime happened in the house, you charged them with burglary, we have to. That's the simplest way to remember it. So when they make up, hey, the guy was walking and he disappeared, so that meant he broke into Ms. Baker's house, you say no house, no Faust. Show me the hairs. Show me the blood. Show me the skin. Show me the DNA in her house, outside of her body, on her skin. Show me something. We presented a photo of Mr. Faust. He does have an afro. And they say, well, the hair in her hands, you know, we just want to show you that it's not Mr. Melton's hair. That's all we want to show you. It's not Mr. Melton's hair. It was Caucasian hair. Now, I don't understand, and you're the jury, you have to decide. How would Ms. Baker get a handful of her own hair? How is that possible? Your hand is outward away from your body, but it's your own hair? But in this case, it doesn't matter because what you're here to decide is if the state presented enough evidence that Mr. Faust is responsible for Ms. Baker's death. And they haven't. But what they are going to argue, they're going to say, hey, it was just one person walking down the street and he disappeared, so we want you to say this was the person that committed this crime. And they harp on, oh, he stayed 585 feet away from her house. He stayed 585 feet away from her house. Well, that means there's an issue with the investigation, because if the person that you say killed Miss Baker stayed that close, why didn't nobody go to the house and speak to him? He did say his grandmother stayed there. You heard the recording. It's my stepmother's house. But now, 24 years later, 25 years later, they want to say, oh, that's evidence of guilt. And I ask you, listen to the recordings. Listen to the pieces played in the recordings. Mr. Faust says multiple times, yeah, I go over there to check on my stepmother. I'll go over there to visit my stepmother. And I don't know about all of you, but we all have permanent addresses. Mr. Faust said he stayed in that house for 40 years, but he also said, yeah, I have different women I stay with here or there. My permanent address, if somebody asks me how long I stayed at my permanent address, even if I'm not physically staying there, I am going to say 30 years. I've been at this address for 30 years. Even if I don't physically stay there, because that's my permanent address. That's where I may want to send taxes. That's if I get a ticket, I may want to send a ticket there. This is my permanent address. The state wants you to take his permanent address and say, well, this is his address. He said he stayed there. So that means he committed this crime. So why not move? If you've caused this much destruction in this community, why not move? If Mr. Faust committed this crime, how would he know that no one saw him? Why even tell police that you stayed there? But you know who did move out of Athens and who admitted they moved out of Athens? Chris Melton. He got the heck out of town. Never to come back. And where did Mr. Melton say he stayed when Miss Baker died? His parents' home. Where does he currently stay? Miss Baker's home. Excuse me, not Miss Baker. I'm sorry. His parents' home. Where does he currently stay? Still in his parents' home. And I want to show you something. And this is the reason Mr. Melton stated that he stayed on the second floor. He is a liar. Because Josh McCurdy came in and said he stayed in the basement. But I'm going to show you why he lied. And this is a ball that was dropped by law enforcement. The reason Mr. Melton lied is because the basement to his house has its own door. So he wanted to separate himself from that door because obviously I had to show him the pictures first. He didn't want you to know that he had an entrance and an exit he could go in that his parents would know nothing about. This is the door right here. Crime of opportunity. Mr. Melton had the opportunity. Think about what Mr. Teeter told us with him dropping his truck off. He dropped his truck off and went to see the police in Josh's truck. Why would he do that? Maybe he didn't want law enforcement to search it. But you all have to decide. But if you say, I'm going to ignore all of that, I believe Mr. Faust was the person walking in orange in the neighborhood. I know the state can't present any evidence that he was in the house, but I just believe it was Mr. Faust. That is my belief. I think it was Mr. Faust. You pull that plug because your mind is settled, is satisfied, and it is not wavering. And you then find Mr. Faust guilty because your mind is satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt. But if you want to say to that doctor, hold on, doctor. Hold on 1 second. If Mr. Faust committed this crime, why would Elizabeth Bigham need to tell Chris Melton we need to explain your DNA? I have questions about that, doctor. That doesn't make sense. Doc, you're telling me to pull the plug, but Miss Baker was sexually assaulted anally, but Chris Melton's DNA is the only DNA present? I don't know, doctor. Also, Chris Melton's hair was found on the murder weapon. And let me clear this up for you, because I think there was a lot of confusion with that. Can you get the picture of Miss Baker and the charger block next to her head? It'll be in the state's exhibit. And I'll show you that picture. But I'll describe it to you. When you see Miss Baker's body as it was found in the home, you're going to see a charger block next to her head. It was connected to the cord used to strangle her. When they tested this cord for hairs, or they tried to find hairs, on this charger block next to her head, I'm going to tell you this. Don't look at the sketch. The sketch has it way far away from her head. Look at the picture. It's right next to her head. You're going to hear that Chris Melton's hair is on the murder weapon. Not Mr. Faust's, Chris Melton's. There was a pubic hair found on Miss Baker's butt. Now, the state brought in this microscopic expert to say, oh, it's Ashley P.V. Hall's hair, and anything is possible, right? But we went with Miss Ashley P.V. Hall. We said, do you have your own bathroom? Or did you have your own bathroom? She said, yes. Did you have your own shower, tub? Yes. Did you have your own toilet? Yes. The mitochondria DNA test, the only DNA test conducted that referred to Chris Melton, determined that he could not be excluded as a contributor of the hair. Miss P.V. Hall could not also be excluded. I want to make that clear. But what law enforcement didn't do, because it didn't fit the narrative of Mr. Faust committing this crime, when they tell you we have new DNA technology, when Mr. Melton's DNA popped up in her body, they didn't retest that hair because it didn't fit their narrative. So potentially, not only is Mr. Melton's DNA in Miss Baker's anus, his hair was on her butt. But they never followed up when the mitochondria DNA test said, we can't exclude him as a contributor. But again, you ask the doctor, Doc, you're telling me that a complete stranger broke into Miss Baker's home without any signs of forced entry, spent time beating her, strangling her, stabbing her, sexually assaulting her, and then he takes the time to clean up the house, setting it on fire and only taking a personal item such as a laptop, despite money, jewelry, diamonds being in the house? And then this stranger was able to somehow lock the back and front door and get away unseen. Is that what you're telling me, Doc? I have questions. And I ask you this, why would Mr. Faust say he stayed at 350 Cooper Road? That's something you need to consider when they say, hey, the fact that he stayed so close is evidence of guilt. But again, how does where he stayed, or his stepmother's home, or the home he visited, because that evidence is an evidence. You can listen to the recording, listen to what he said. How does evidence that he stayed close to Miss Baker's home prove that he murdered her? Because that's the jump the state wants you to make. They want you to hear, oh, he stayed close and his DNA was in there, so that means he murdered her, he raped her. He did these horrific acts. We can't prove he's in the house, and remember, no house, no Faust. We cannot prove he's in the house. But we want you to look at all this other stuff. Look at it, look how close he is. They went out and got drone footage, just wasting time. Drone footage to show you how close the houses were. So what? So what? Ask them, how does that prove your case? The burden is on you. Give us the evidence. We want to protect this community, but we also want to avoid injustices. If you want us to convict, give us the evidence. The other one with the block next to her hip. That isn't evidence of a crime. That's evidence of proximity, but that isn't evidence of a crime. They've charged Mr. Faust with some crime so disgusting. When you all heard him, you were like, oh my God. Certain people say they had physical reactions. But the best evidence you come with is the fact that he stayed close, and you go spend all this money doing drone footage. Ms. Bigham, I believe, you're the jury, you will remember the testimony better than I. I believe she said it was like $5 million they had for this case, or a $5 million budget or something like that, or a Baker-Coleman Act bill that provided a certain amount of money. I don't know, I could be mistaken. Okay, I probably am mistaken, so I'm gonna leave that one alone. But if you say that Mr. Faust being close to the home is a problem, in 2001, why nobody went to the home to speak with anyone? They presented no records, no evidence of who they spoke with, where they went. That's their job. The judge is going to tell you Mr. Faust doesn't have to present any evidence. If we needed to, we're prepared to. But Mr. Faust didn't have to present that. They were required to, and they didn't. You say, Doctor, I still have questions. Chris Melton's hands, how did they look like that? This is a tough picture, but it's part of the evidence in this case. This is where Chris Melton's hair was found. It was found on this object right here. This is Miss Baker's head. So when we say Mr. Melton's hair was found on a murder weapon, the cord used to strangle This cord here is wrapped around Miss Baker's neck. So when we say his hair was found on the murder weapon, it literally was found on the murder weapon, next to her head. And again, I'm going to emphasize this for deliberations. Don't look at the sketch, because the sketch, you have the photos. You don't have to look at a sketch of how the scene looked. You have the photos yourself. Just. Also, Detective Ricketts stated that he fingerprinted Chris Melton. I'm sure you remember that testimony. He said, the reason I know there were no injuries on Mr. Melton's hands is because I fingerprinted Chris Melton. So there's two questions you have to ask. If you were not arresting Chris Melton, why were you fingerprinting Chris Melton? That's one. The second question, and maybe it's in evidence. I don't recall seeing it, but maybe it's in evidence. Ask them for the fingerprint card. Ask them for the fingerprint card. They said they did it. We don't just take a person's word for it, especially when you have a history of being dishonest. Show us the fingerprint card. So what I anticipate you should have in evidence is a fingerprint card taken from January 19th, 2001. Make sure you look at the dates, okay? So if it says January 23rd or January 22nd, that isn't what Detective Ricketts said on the stand. There should be a fingerprint card for January 19, 2001 with Mr. Melton's fingerprints in it. You can open all of this stuff if you want to. You're the jury. You're the finders of fact. So Detective Ricketts said it. Ask for the evidence. But when the doctor says pull that plug, you say, doctor, one of my gravest concerns is that law enforcement seemed just much more so focused not on justice for Ms. Baker, not on resolving this, answering these questions for the Baker family. They seem more focused on protecting themselves. And maybe Chris Melton. Doctor, I'm not sure. Doc, you're asking me to pull the plug, but where was Chris Melton before 9 a.m.? All these witnesses came in. Every law enforcement officer, they fought me. They fought me when it came to confirming Chris's alibi. It was confirmed. It was confirmed. It was confirmed. All right, well, let's break it down piece by piece. Did you confirm this? No, but it was still confirmed. Okay. Talk to me about Nash Plumbing. Did you get documents? No, but it was still confirmed. All right. Josh McCourty, did you get any proof that they ever worked together? No, but it was still confirmed. And then they'll try to jump to the bank. And the reason I emphasize the bank is because the bank is irrelevant. The bank is at 9:08. Ms. Baker was killed in the morning time. According to the state, it was somebody walking around at 8 a.m., 8:30. According to the state. 9 a.m. is irrelevant. So don't let the state come up here and tell you, oh, his alibi was confirmed. You ask them, well, where's the evidence related to Nash Plumbing? They didn't call one witness from Nash Plumbing. And we told them for, I believe, months, Mr. Faust didn't commit this crime. Weeks before this trial, we told the state because we wanted them to disprove it. Chris Melton killed Tara Baker. And that was with the hope that they'll look at their case and say, oh, maybe we got a problem. But instead, what they do, they meet with all their witnesses and they prep them. And they say, you know what? Chris Melton didn't do anything. You don't give any answers that the defense attorney wants. We're going to prep you. We're going to talk to you about it. Anything they say that Chris Melton did, you say the opposite. They knew this stuff. This isn't new. Everything you heard, they knew. This is their evidence. I didn't make any of this evidence. The only evidence that I brought to you is the picture of Chris Melton's house because they didn't want you to know that. But everything else you've seen and you've heard in this case, I didn't go find it on my own. They knew this, and they chose to ignore it to focus on him. And I'll tell you this, way to evidence Chris Melton, Edrick Faust. The evidence related to Chris Melton substantially outweighs the evidence related to Edrick Faust. Could you imagine me in this courtroom trying to defend the hands that Mr. Melton had? And my argument as well, 2 days after her death, he was punching the wall. You all would look at me and say, this guy's crazy. What is he in here talking about? Or if I was trying to defend Mr. Melton and I said, well, my client, he went to pick up his truck on Saturday, he went to get a bank loan on Monday, and then he went out on 2 dates within a week of her death. You would say, this guy's, what is he talking about? Why are we here? Think about the evidence you heard about Chris Melton. Think about how he was on the stand. You had a killer in here talking to you that has gotten away for 23 years. He didn't shed one tear. I showed him a picture of Miss Baker. He didn't shed one tear. Think about that. Edrick Faust did not harm Miss Baker. But you don't have to take my word for it. You can look at the evidence. You can look at the evidence. So you say, doctor, the state has to explain how Mr. Faust's DNA alone means rape. How does his proximity, if you say he stayed there, how does his proximity mean murder, rape, arson, aggravated sodomy, 2 counts, 4 counts of felony murder, burglary? You need the evidence. So, doctor, you don't pull that plug. Hold on, my mind is wavering. It is not satisfied. It is not settled. I have questions. Doc, don't pull that plug. When Mr. Faust chose you all to decide his case, he gave you all awesome power. You may have noticed that each and every time the Honorable Judge Lott entered and exited this courtroom, we'd stand in her presence. And the reason we stand in the Honorable Judge Lott's presence is to show respect for her awesome power as the giver of laws in this courtroom. You may have also noticed each and every time you, ladies and gentlemen, entered and exited this courtroom, we stand in your presence. Because just like Judge Lott, you all are the judges of the facts in this case. In our standing, that is symbolic to show our respect to your power. The first thing you did as a body when you entered this courtroom, when you entered this jury box, you stood up, you raised your right hand, and you took an oath. And by that oath, each of you promised, you swore to decide this case based on 2 things. 1, the facts, only as they came out in this courtroom. And 2, the law as given to you by the Honorable Judge Lott. Because you need to understand the law and the facts, I would like to discuss them both with you at this time. Starting with the law. The first principle of law that I like to discuss with you is the Bill of Indictment. Okay? Don't be afraid of this document. This is a very important document. Embrace it and read it. Because in this document contains the charges that you will decide against Mr. Faust. During your deliberations, and this is very important, use this document because this will tell you what evidence you're looking for. The indictment was returned by the grand jury, and you've heard this term before, of Clark County. And what the grand jury is 16 to 23 people. They meet with the district attorney's office, and you've heard Agent Bigham's testimony, but they meet with a summary witness, okay? A summary witness is a witness that just comes in and tells the group about the case. I can't be there. Mr. Faust can't be there. He can't defend himself. He can't hear anything that you all heard. The judge isn't there. It's simply the district attorney's office and their witness. And they tell the room whatever they want to tell them. And they return an indictment. And the judge will tell you that this indictment is not evidence of guilt whatsoever, in any way whatsoever. And the reason why is because it is only a one-sided story. That's it. It's a one-sided story. That's how you get this indictment. Give you a short story. If anybody's ever dealt with a lawsuit in here, similar to a lawsuit, right? Let's say you're at home, you go to your neighbor's house, you say, neighbor, I want to build a fence on my property, okay? I am going to build a fence 5 feet inside of my property line because I don't want to encroach on your property. All right, do you have any problems with that? Do you want to go get your own surveyor? Do you want to have somebody come out and look at it? I don't want any problems with you, so I'm going to make sure I build it 5 inches inside of my property line. Your neighbor says, no, don't worry about it. You build your fence. One night, you're at home eating dinner with your family, and you receive a knock on the door. You go to the door, you open it, and it's the Clark County Sheriff's Office. Might be that gentleman over there. He's serving you with a summons and complaint. And he says, sir, ma'am, you're being sued by your neighbor for the fence you built on their property. And you say, what? That's absurd. I talked to my neighbor. They didn't want to discuss it. I built it 5 feet inside of my property line. He's going to tell you that's not for me. But what you all could do, which all of us could do, you could go, you could hire your own lawyer, you could pick a jury, and you could let the jury decide what occurred. Because what you didn't know, your neighbor, when he got his lawyer, they typed up a summons and complaint, and you got sued. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Doesn't mean your neighbor's right. Doesn't mean your neighbor's telling the truth. But that's the way a civil case gets started. The same thing with the bill of indictment. It's just the way a criminal case gets started. The next principle of law I'd like to discuss with you are the 12 counts in the indictment. The sole issue in this case, it may make deliberations very simple for you all. The sole issue, everything that is charged in this indictment we believe occurred. The sole issue where we are on opposite ends of the earth is whether or not Mr. Faust committed these crimes. That's the sole issue you have to decide. Has the state presented enough evidence that Mr. Faust committed these offenses? Malice murder. It's the first count in the indictment. And you're going to have these jury charges. The first element of malice murder, and this is the only question you have to answer in regards to malice murder, the first element is that the defendant, in this case Mr. Faust, caused the death of another person. That's the only question you have to answer in regards to malice murder. Did Mr. Faust, let me change that, did the state, because it's their burden, did the state present enough evidence to you to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Faust, and I hate to use this language, but murdered Miss Baker? I'll tell you they didn't, and we've discussed it. No house, no Faust. They didn't present any evidence placing Mr. Faust in the home. That's first and foremost. None. They admitted in opening statements they can't even tell you how he got into the home. Right? And I'm telling you what their argument is going to be. It's going to be choose anybody that was walking in the neighborhood. We want you to say that's Mr. Faust. That's what they're going to tell you. They're going to say, Jay Anderson saw a guy walking that fit Mr. Faust's description, and he disappeared when Mr. Anderson went away from the window. So that means this guy ran around the house and broke in the house. Ask him for evidence. The person that killed Miss Baker knew Miss Baker. That has always been our position. Look at the photos of the crime. The person that killed her knew her. They were angry. Why they were angry, we don't know. It didn't come in this case. But they were enraged. It was an overkill. Counts 2 through 5 are felony murder. They charged Mr. Faust with 4 counts of felony murder. To convict of felony murder, the state must prove, and again, it's only one issue that you have to decide with all these counts, that Mr. Faust is the individual that engaged in these acts. And they have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. We've addressed counts 1 through 5. Count 6, burglary. The state must prove that Mr. Faust, and again, it's every count, they have to prove Mr. Faust did this, that Mr. Faust entered the home. And we can stop there. We don't even have to go through every other element. They have to prove that Mr. Faust is the person that entered Miss Baker's home. And the state has admitted that although, and I repeat this because it's so mind-blowing to me, that although they can't prove how Mr. Faust got in the home or that Mr. Faust was in the home, this gentleman is sitting over here. That has been shocking to me since day one. They can't prove, or matter of fact, We all know now that the science says Chris Melton is the only identifiable DNA profile in Ms. Baker's anus, but they have this gentleman sitting over here charged with aggravated sodomy. That's why juries protect the community. That's why we have juries. Because the first thing any totalitarian governmental system does, they get rid of the jury. They say we decide who's guilty or who's innocent. This right here, and a lot of you may not know what this is, okay? But this right here is the strongest symbol in any democratic society that uses jurors. And I could kick it, I could probably rip it off the ground. But the reason this is so powerful, and the reason you see this in every single courthouse, is because when they were putting the Constitution together, when they were founding this great country, this is in place to symbolize the separation between the people and the government. This is the strongest symbol, this partition, and that's why their table is closer, because they want to make it clear. This is a separation of the people from the government. Oral sodomy. The state must prove that Mr. Faust forcibly and against Ms. Baker's will, and they presented no evidence of that. And I think this is significant. And I may say this wrong, but I'm going to say it, so please forgive me. If I stumble over my words, please forgive me. Elizabeth Bingham was the person that decided who raped Ms. Baker and who didn't. She had two options. She had Chris Melton, she had Mr. Faust. She was the one that had to make the call. She was the lead investigator on this case. So it wasn't Ms. Baker saying, hey, this is who did it to me. Ms. Baker had Caucasian hair everywhere. She tried to leave him something. But Elizabeth Bingham is the person that made the call. And despite all the evidence in this case, and she told you that she reviewed her entire case, for everything in this case that I've seen, she's seen. Instead of saying, hey, you know what, let me follow the evidence, she sets a meeting with Chris Melton and tells Mr. Melton, look, this is what we need to do. She hasn't talked to Mr. Faust. She doesn't know Mr. Faust at this point. It's just, this is what we need to do. I'm going to go after this other guy. So when you think about these charges, I want you to think about them in the context of why we are here. There isn't a person saying that Mr. Faust did all these terrible things outside of the person who had to make the decision on who to pursue. And they chose Mr. Faust. So they have to present evidence supporting that Mr. Faust was engaged with Ms. Baker without consent. And the court is going to tell you that. You're going to hear it in jury instructions. They have to prove that any contact was without consent. And Mr. Faust can't answer that question for you. They snatch him up 24 years later. Chris Melton has been answering the question for 23 years, or 25 at this point. And his answers, lies, 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 lies. A person lied to me one time, I'm done with him forever. If somebody could take an oath before God and get on this witness stand before God and lie, is that somebody you could trust? He's shown police multiple times he's willing to lie. He said 7 times he saw her 10 days and switched it for him. And then he came here and said the same thing. Oh, I was mistaken on the 10 days. You know, Liz, he called her by her first name. He actually has a nickname for her. He calls her Liz. You know, Liz reminded me that it was actually 5 days when I saw her. He's a liar. He's not truthful. Mr. Yalamachili told you, the purpose of a case, any trial, is to find out the truth. You don't build a case to find the truth based on liars and lies. And this is what this case has been. This is very important for you to consider in deliberations. There is no evidence of sperm in this case. I want to make that very clear. You heard a GBI person come up. They talked about sperm for a little bit. We made our objection. And you notice that she never mentioned sperm again. But she also admitted when we were doing examinations that she didn't test it for sperm. In evidence, you will have a sperm test that says there is no spermatozoa. So when the state tells you this is a rape case, his DNA is in her mouth, okay, how? How? This is a rape case, it's in her vagina, okay, it's no sperm. We don't know, it's 24 years later. But they have to prove that. Now, I want to make it 100% clear. If they say it's rape, they have to prove it is rape with evidence, not speculation, and I told you this during opening. Not with because we say so. It requires evidence. Count 8, rape, as I just mentioned, I want to make it clear. No assumptions, no stereotypes. You make your decision based on evidence. The state wants you to rely on assumptions. They want you to make leaps. Not inferences, they want you to make leaps. They want you to assume things. They want you to have stereotypes. Base it on the evidence. And when we chose you as jurors, when Mr. Faust chose you as jurors, we chose people that we felt followed procedure, respected the law, and will require evidence to be presented. Aggravated assault, same thing. They have to prove that it's Mr. Faust. And finishing up, I thank you all for your patience. Just want to make sure I cover all bases. I believe I addressed the whole drainage theory. It is not possible. And don't take my word for it. Take Ms. Hinkle's word for it. It's not possible. 3 days is the max. Ms. Baker was killed on a Friday. Chris lied and said he saw her on Sunday. It was really 10 days, but we'll say 5 days to be nice. It's not possible. And they probably knew it. That's why they didn't ask Ms. Hinkle about anal, because they knew she would have said, well, it's only 3 days. The theory doesn't make sense. And again, they did ask her, and she said, well, for it to reset in the anus, it requires penetration. Drainage is not an option anymore. They told you in opening, that's how it got there. It's not an option anymore. The science says otherwise. Trust the science. You don't have to trust us. Trust the science. They brought in evidence that Ms. Baker showered daily. That's something that you need to keep in mind. Dr. Falzone, he was the medical examiner in this case. I just want to make it clear. He has made clear there was an anal sexual assault. State can't dance around that. He made it clear the injuries were consistent with sexual assault to her anus. Count 11, arson in the first degree. Again, they have to prove that Mr. Faust committed that offense. Possession of a knife during the commission of the crime. Again, they have to prove Mr. Faust. That's the only question. Has the state presented enough evidence to you to say that this was Mr. Faust? Judge is going to give you instruction on credibility of witnesses. Remember who was honest in this case. John Newton, he was honest. Bill Teeter, he was honest. The physical evidence, it is honest. The science, it is honest. In all of those, and I'll say two, the physical evidence and the science supports Mr. Faust's innocence. The physical evidence and the science supports, not even the physical evidence and science, the physical evidence, the science, and his statements support Chris Melton's guilt. But I made this clear in opening. You're not here to decide whether or not Chris Melton committed this crime. So in deliberations, don't say, well, do we think Chris Melton did it, or do we think Mr. Faust did it? Your only focus is, does the evidence support beyond a reasonable doubt? If you say maybe Mr. Melton did it, maybe Mr. Faust did it, the vote is not guilty. We discussed that. Now I want to talk about something that I think is significant in this case, and I'm sure you're all aware of this because we talked about it in jury selection. And we also talked about it in opening. One of the biggest pieces, there is a bill that was passed in this a bill that was passed in this case, and Ms. Bigham talked about it. I told you in opening that it was the fame, the lights, being the superstar police officer that closed this case that led them to say, hey, this is somebody we could put as the face of Ms. Baker's death. But I want you to consider Mr. Faust is put on the news as the bad guy. This case, he hasn't been the bad guy once in this case. Right? The worst you've heard about Mr. Faust in this case is the indictment. They spent, and listen, I took to heart when people said, hey, we got stuff to do. We got to get out of here. We can't stay here 6 weeks. We can't stay here 8 weeks. We can't stay here 4 weeks. They spent 7 days defending Chris Melton. Think about how long you've been here. They spent 7 days on Chris Melton and 2 days on Mr. Faust, maybe 3. I'll tell you in this case, the reason this case is the way it is because the state didn't expect anyone to care about Mr. Faust. They didn't expect anyone to do the work for Mr. Faust. They did not expect anybody to take Mr. Faust's case seriously. Once they showed, hey, this is the person that committed this terrible act, what they expected was probably a 2-day trial. Expected some guy to just come in here and say, oh, this client is terrible, we don't care. They expected you all to come in here, and they truly, they expected you all to come in here and say, hey, his DNA is enough, I'm done. That's what they expected. That's the only reason they would bring you a case so weak. And that's why we said in opening, speculations aren't allowed here, right? We have to follow the law. We have to look at the evidence because they wanted you as jurors to just say his DNA is enough. He did it. He did it. That's it. That's our case. And that's why they spend so much time in opening talking about these numbers. Oh, it's so big. It's this, it's that. Because they want you to say, we don't care about the evidence. His DNA is enough. The state could do that. You are the protectors of this community. We don't do that. If we put people away, we put them away with evidence. It's rules to the law. They have to follow the law. And you tell them, bring us the evidence. Because we're going to do our jobs. We're going to abide by our oaths. They want you to convict on emotion, speculation, assumptions. They want you to believe Mr. Faust has to explain his DNA. The judge is going to tell you he absolutely does not. And the way she's going to frame it is Mr. Faust doesn't have to present any evidence. They have the burden of proof. And thank you for your patience. I am wrapping up. I asked you for a few more minutes. 16. The next principle I'd like to discuss with you is the presumption of innocence. That is a very, very, very powerful principle. In America, every person that has to be charged with a crime is presumed innocent. And we do that for humanitarian reasons. It would be terrible for someone who didn't know anything about a case to presume that someone is guilty, to presume that someone committed something just because they are charged with the offense. That would be considered inhumane because not only would that happen to me, that would happen to everyone. So when we became a country, in our Constitution, it was written that every single person charged with a crime is to be presumed innocent. And again, I told you, it covers him from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. So the state's evidence could rip off the chest plate of that armor of Mr. Faust. It could rip off an arm. It could rip off a leg. It could rip off the helmet of that armor. But if there's a piece on the elbow, if there's a piece of armor left on the knee, just as Mr. Faust walked in here and met you all 3 weeks ago, that presumption is not guilty. So how much evidence does it take to rip off that suit of armor? And who has to present that evidence to rip off that suit of armor? And we've already discussed that the state has the burden of proof. And the next principle I would like to discuss with you is the burden of proof. The state has all the resources, okay? Mr. Faust is a single individual. All of us are single individuals. The state, they have the power of the state. They have the money of the state. So when it comes to bringing cases, they have the power. They have the resources. That's why they have the burden of proof. So where's all the evidence that they have to marshal in with so much power to say that this person committed this crime? It's not a flip of the coin. It's not a maybe I believe he did it, maybe he did it, he might have did it. They have to bring in so much evidence that it rips off that entire suit of armor. And that standard is known as proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and we discussed what proof beyond a reasonable doubt means. The judge is going to tell you the lack of evidence. The lack of evidence. If there's some evidence you want to see that you don't see, the lack of evidence is a reason to doubt. And you tell the prosecutor, you didn't prove your case. Don't ask me to convict someone when you don't present the evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, it is your verdict. This is your courtroom. It is your decision as a body. And I told you in opening, I was going to ask you individually and as a body to render a not guilty verdict for Mr. Faust. You're going to get a verdict form, and I believe but you're going to receive a verdict form, and I'll show you the verdict form once we get it. And it's going to have a line. And it's going to say, we the jury find Mr. Faust, and it may say defendant, it may have a generic term, not guilty or guilty. And you, individuals, will write in, not guilty or guilty. All 12 of you on the jury panel have to agree to a verdict. Don't surrender your verdict. If you feel that your position is truthful, whatever it may be, don't surrender your verdict. Don't say, okay, it's 4:45 on a Friday, I'm ready to go home. Thank you. Let's just go ahead and check this off because I want to go. Don't do that, because once you render your verdict, that's it. You can't come back and fix it. You cannot come back and fix it. So you took an oath. Follow that oath. I know each and every one of you will, because otherwise Mr. Faust would not have chosen you to sit on the jury. He would not have chosen you to decide his fate. I took an oath as well, and I didn't stand up to take my oath, but I also took an oath. And I'm going to have things to tell you. The prosecution is going to get up. They're going to make their argument. But due to the rules, I cannot say another word to you. This is my last time. This is Mr. Faust's last time having an opportunity to say anything to you. So they're going to say things that I am going to disagree with, but I won't have another opportunity to speak with any of you. I may think of something later that I forgot to say, but Mr. Faust trusts you. He trusts you with his life. We trust you. I want to thank you for your time and your devotion to this community, the United States of America, as well as the state of Georgia. In regards to malice murder, which is count 1, we ask you to vote not guilty. In regards to felony murder, count 2, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to felony murder, count 3, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to felony murder, count 5, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to burglary, count 6, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to aggravated sodomy, count 7, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to rape, count 8, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to aggravated assault, count 9, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to aggravated sodomy, count 10, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to arson in the first degree, count 11, we ask that you all vote not guilty. In regards to possession of a knife during the commission of a felony, we ask that you vote not guilty. Court's indulgence. And forgive me, I skipped count 4. Count 4, felony murder, it's the exact same thing. We're asking that you all vote not guilty. There was something that I didn't mention. I was trying to be considerate of you all's time and kind of get through the argument. But there was something said by Agent Bigham, and I'll end on this note. She stated that Chris Melton's DNA was supposed to be there. There was her statement to you all when we asked about the DNA. Something that isn't appropriate in this case is to assume that because someone is a boyfriend and the timeline doesn't fit, that they are entitled to someone's body. Ms. Baker could tell Mr. Melton no. His DNA being there doesn't automatically mean he has access to her. And I would tell you all to reject that statement from Ms. Bigham, but also use that to judge her credibility. She would rather tell you that Mr. Melton's DNA is supposed to be there despite it being in a place he said that it shouldn't be, right? They're saying, hey, this guy may not have committed this crime. She chose Mr. Faust's DNA as the DNA that shouldn't be there versus the guy that told her, yeah, my DNA shouldn't be there. That isn't anything that she did. But I submit this case to you all. I want to thank you all for your time, your attention, and your patience with me throughout this trial. On an ending note, if I have done anything to offend anybody, please forgive me. Hold it against me. Don't hold it against my client. I truly apologize. I promise you it was not intentional. But again, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for leaving your lives to hear this case. We trust you. We ask that you find Mr. Faust not guilty.